Today from the global lane, foreign policy and the presidential candidates, where Trump and Harris differ, especially regarding Israel.
I fear that she would even be more wishy-washy and pro-Palestinian than Biden has been, and he's tried to have it both ways.
Chinese spies, terrorists, and Latino gangs threaten American security. And in Springfield, Ohio, immigrants are eating city park geese.
And so the question is, why would our government allow this to happen?
Who has the best plan for America's future? Not Project 2025, Donald Trump, or Kamala Harris.
We are in a war for the soul of America, and the war is between good and evil. But I know who's in charge of all this. And it's not Washington, D.C. God is in control, not man.
Goodbye freedom, hello one-party rule. Advocating change in Nicaragua and Venezuela leads to imprisonment or expulsion. And it's all right here on the global lane. Although the economy and immigration are the top concerns for Americans this election season, there are some stark differences in the foreign policy positions of the two presidential candidates. Here to discuss more is former U.S. Ambassador to the Vatican and former Congressman Francis Rooney. Ambassador Rooney, it's always good to talk with you. So let's begin with Israel and the Gaza war. Trump says he wants Israel to finish the job, get it done quickly. Would Kamala Harris continue the Biden policy? How would her approach differ from that of Donald Trump?
I fear that she would even be more wishy-washy and pro-Palestinian than Biden has been. And he's tried to have it both ways, you know. He takes it away from Israel and praises the Palestinian righteousness and about the hostages and the innocents that are killed that are not Israel's fault. They're Hamas's fault, the people who don't value life.
Well, so do you expect that she'd put more pressure on Netanyahu to end the war or accept a ceasefire?
I would expect that she would. I would expect that she would be pressuring for less civilian casualties and a ceasefire.
Okay, how about Iran policy? Trump says he'd impose tough sanctions on Iran. He contends the lifting of penalties for countries dealing with Iran led to more revenue for Tehran, and much of it ended up in the hands of Israel's enemies, Hamas and Hezbollah. So what could we expect from Kamala Harris?
Well, I think the last two Democrat administrations have given a pretty clear pathway towards what they would do, towards understanding what they would do. Both Obama and Biden have given Iran a lot of money. They did that defective nuclear deal that never allowed us to police their military bases, which is where they've been doing all their nuclear reactor development. And I imagine Harris will do the same. I don't understand the Democrat thing with Iran.
Well, they're getting very close to a nuclear weapon. So
yes, they are.
What should we do?
I think we should do what President Trump has implied. I think we should be very tough on them, have maximum sanctions, maximum isolation, penalize people that trade with them, and make it really hard on them to be the autocratic, oppressive leadership that they have there.
Well, how about supporting some of the opposition in Iran? It seems like we never really help them physically, materially, but maybe a few verbal words here and there. But how about that?
Well, we actually do that through the Corporation for Public Media. That used to be called Radio Free Europe. We have almost 20% market share of broadcasting into Iran in Farsi. So there are some efforts being undermade to undermine them from within. But, you know, when under Obama's time, when we had that short-lived green revolution, when the students and young people of Iran stood up against the mullahs, Obama didn't do anything. So I don't know how we can get some people to do it now.
I don't know if you've had a chance to go to Kamala Harris's website, but I searched through it. I didn't see anything on foreign policy on her website, but foreign policy analysts tout her experience. They say she's made 17 trips overseas in the past 3.5 years. She even met China's Xi Jinping. So in your opinion, would she be tough on China? Some Americans fear that Trump's confrontational approach with China could lead to war. So what do you believe?
I don't believe in weakness. I think when weakness and vacillation only empowers our adversaries and encourages authoritarianism around the world. And I think we're going to see that out of Kamala Harris. She's weak right now. And it's not like what Woody Allen said. Showing up is not 90% in foreign policy. If you go to a foreign country on an official trip, you better do something. You better make our positions clear.
Well, so you expect more spy balloons crossing over the United States? What do you expect to happen?
Or more use of these Confucian centers on campuses to surveil students and surveil Americans like the Chinese do right now. I tried to get rid of them when I was in Congress, and I couldn't get anybody interested in it. Maybe it was too complex of an issue for Congress, but the Chinese are undermining us from within on college campuses everywhere.
I'm sure you're familiar with the latest on Chinese spies.
Oh, yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
More of that happening? I mean,
I think we're just being caught asleep at the switch in so many areas. Chinese spies, the business about the Russian influence that was in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week. I mean, what are we doing? We're not doing anything. And we've got a feeble old president who hasn't been able to do anything in the world. Before that, you had Obama, who what he did was bad, laughing at Russia when they took Crimea. Going to Egypt and apologizing for the United States. And so I think Harris would just be more of the same.
Okay, what about Ukraine? Trump suggests he could end the war in one day. Most foreign policy experts think negotiations would take longer than that. Would Harris likely beef up support for NATO and the Ukraine military, or break with Biden's policy and push for a negotiated peace?
I think she would continue the policy that's in place now, and it's gotten us nowhere. The only leader in the world that's tried to get together other countries to talk about a solution to this mess is President Macron of France, and nobody paid attention to it. We desperately need to bring some type of diplomatic structure to bear of the countries of Western Europe to come up with some solutions to end this thing.
Well, finally, regarding Donald Trump, many Americans view him as a bull in the china shop when it comes to foreign policy. But if he's reelected, how likely would he be to take a more diplomatic approach and build coalitions and alliances to advance American interests worldwide? Well,
the liberal media is not going to say anything good about Trump or what he did. They're not going to say that he moved the capital to Jerusalem like every president since Reagan has said they were going to do and didn't do. They haven't said anything about his success behind the scenes of bringing the moderate Arab states, the Sunni states, into a relationship with Israel, which is part of what's driving Iran crazy right now. But the long-term future of the area has got to have the moderate, reasonable Arabs working together with Israel for stability in the region. And you're not ever going to do anything with Palestine unless you have the moderate Arabs involved in it.
Okay, we'll see what happens here. Stark differences between the two candidates on foreign policy. Ambassador Francis Rooney, thank you for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
A deadly terrorist attack could happen here in America in the near future. That's a word from national security insiders. Experts are urging the government to use everything it's learned in the interim to prevent another attack before it's too late. William Federer is here with us to provide some insights. He's an author and speaker, and his new book is Silence Equals Consent, The Sin of Omission. Speak now or forever lose your freedom. Bill, you warned years ago that terrorists were crossing the U.S. border illegally. Now this, the FBI warning of a terror attack. Is it a matter of if or when?
Well, good question. And we see that as soon as President Biden came into office, construction on the border wall ceased. And then we've had 12 million estimated illegal immigrants come into the country since then. And we see Venezuelan gangs in the Bronx, in Wisconsin, in Chicago, in Colorado. I personally talked to a missionary who said he witnessed poor Haitians being put on airplanes, and he knows they could not afford tickets, being flown to Nicaragua, then being flown into America. Then also, I talked to individuals that said that Somalians are being flown to Qatar and then to Istanbul and then to America. And they're pulling past the terminals, and buses come and take them and bus them to cities all around the country. And the question is, why? I was studying where prior to 1965, most immigrants came to America from Europe, and they had a work ethic where it was a social stigma to receive a handout. and they would tend to vote for candidates that would take away as little as possible from their hard-earned wealth. Well, Lyndon Johnson and Senator Edward Kennedy changed the immigration quotas in 1965 to intentionally bring in more immigrants from poor countries who did not have this social stigma about receiving a handout, and they signed them up for the Great Society welfare state. And a phenomenon was observed that when people signed up for welfare, they tended to vote for candidates that would keep it coming. And it effectively was a way to build a Democrat voter base. But then we see another phenomenon of violence going up in big cities. And is this on purpose or intentional? And if you study the repercussions, as violence goes up, some people move out of the city. Who? Well, pro-family people. Well, they tend to be a higher percentage Republican, and pro-business people. It's hard to shop when customers don't feel safe. Well, pro-business people tend to be a higher percentage Republican. Well, who's left in the city? Well, people on welfare. Well, they tend to be a higher percentage Democrat. And guess what? Everyone who left the city, their name stays on the voter rolls. So if someone wanted to do voter fraud, there would be a cushion there and nobody would notice. And in election years, whoever wins the big city ends up winning the state. Whoever wins the state gets all the electoral votes for the state, and the president is elected by electoral votes. Lo and behold, there's a political benefit to one party by having crime go up in the big cities. It's a sad reality, but that's the situation we're now facing.
We're also seeing a record number of young Chinese men coming across. The recent China spy case in New York is telling. So what are the Chinese and terrorists after, and why should we be concerned?
Right. So these are not poor people. These are people with money that are coming across from China. My wife, right here in Florida, witnessed a number of these Chinese young men pulling roller bags down major roads where there's no buildings, just walking along a highway pulling roller bags. And then we hear stories of them wandering onto military bases and getting caught and probing. And so when you look at what China has done worldwide, they do have globalist ambitions, pretty clear regarding Taiwan and other areas. And so the question is, why would our government allow this to happen? And it is something that more and more people are realizing we need to wake up. We need to call our elected officials to account. There's school board meetings and city council meetings. I saw one in Ohio where a black gentleman was complaining about Haitian immigrants who don't know how to drive and having cats and dogs being eaten by immigrants. Sad. It's uncomfortable for us to talk about this, but this is what people are facing in these communities. And we're finding out that they're being helped by certain NGOs. These are charities. And the New York Post had an article identifying some of them, alleging that Catholic charities, Lutheran charities, to some degree United Way and others, are helping to bring these illegals in and sign them up for all the programs without the people in the community knowing about it. And the people just wake up and say, where did they come from? It's one thing helping the poor, but you need to let the people in the community know you're doing it and give them a say. It's their community. Give them a say as to whether or not they would like this to happen.
Okay, the book is Silence Equals Consent. The Sin of Omission. Speak now or forever lose your freedom. William Federer, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Less than 2 months before the U.S. presidential election, Americans are pondering which set of policies voters will embrace, Donald Trump's or those of Kamala Harris. Our next guest believes that God's policies are the best for the country. We should not underestimate his plan for America. Art Alley is the founder and president of Timothy Plan, a pro-life, pro-family mutual fund group. Art, we just celebrated the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. We have many challenges ahead with the economy, immigration, crime, mass shootings, wars, rumors of wars. The country seems to be on the precipice of major change. So you believe, though, our best days are still ahead. What gives you that optimism?
Well, Gary, first, glad to be on with you. But I know who's in charge of all this. And it's not Washington, D.C. It's not any capital of any state. It's not the political. We are in a war for the soul of America, and the war is between good and evil, like it always has been. And, you know, ultimately, we win and they lose. And that's what I liked about Ronald Reagan when he said, how do you think all this is going to come out? Well, it's easy. We win. We win because God is in control. Not me, not the president, not anybody. But that doesn't mean that while we're here, we shouldn't engage. We are commanded to occupy. But, you know, I know who's in charge. And, you know, you may not know this, but my wife went to heaven a year and a half ago. And she used to get so frustrated as she hated liars and deceivers and all of the stuff from the evil side. But if I could hear her voice from heaven now, I know exactly what she'd say. She'd say, you know what? None of that really matters. Do the best you can while you're here. But ultimately, you can't stay here. We're going there. But that doesn't relieve us of the responsibility to engage. And, you know, we're pretty doggone active in that, the role, but God is in control, not man.
Well, as most Americans engage, they agree that prices need to come down, mass immigration must be addressed. However, there's great division over the abortion issue, and this November, voters in 10 states will be asked to codify abortions in their constitutions. So how can we ever come together on that politically divisive issue?
I don't think that's going to happen, Gary. You know, how in the world can you argue about killing babies? You know, you use terms, you use abortion, you use choice, you use all of these terms. But bottom line, you're killing babies. And the side that, you know, is supporting that, there's good and there's evil. And, you know, they're just on the evil side. I don't know that that's ever going to be resolved. I don't know that it ever has been resolved in the history of mankind. But, you know, the disappointment I have, and, you know, you have to make choices.
Most catastrophic events like 9/11 unite us as a people. The nation seems pretty polarized right now. Yeah, well, I was going to say, we seem pretty polarized right now over many issues and the country's direction. So what must happen for us to be united again, and not only temporarily?
Well, I think, you know, what we really need is a great awakening, Gary. People need to come to grips with the fact that God is in control. And that's starting to happen. I don't know if you reported on what happened at my alma mater, the Ohio State University. Where a revival broke out on the university campus, led by the football players who are the heroes, and people will follow what they do. Baptisms occurred. If that could spread, and I think the only hindrance to that is the big problem we have in America is in the church. All these problems lie at the doorstep of the church. God's church has diluted his principles, and his principles only work, Gary, every time. So until the church shows a little more gumption and awake and committed to God's ways, until that happens, I don't know that there can be a great awakening. I don't know that there can. It's not up to me, it's up to him. But I'm seeing glimmers of hope. The pendulum is starting to swing back. America is still a country that is dominated by people who have basic moral Christian biblical values. The problem is all of us on that side have been very quiet and sitting back and allowing, you know, the other side to run rampant and to totally destroy the biblical and cultural and moral foundations of this land.
Okay.
And when you brought up abortion, you know, why would we be arguing about killing babies? I mean, that is so fundamentally wrong.
Okay. Art Alley, Timothy Plan President. Thank you, Art, for sharing your thoughts with us today. We appreciate it. God bless you.
Hey, Gary, thank you. God bless you.
If you disagree with what someone says about you, if you feel threatened by their popularity, throw them in prison or banish them from the country. That's happened in recent days in Nicaragua and Venezuela. However, there was good news in Managua. Negotiations between the Nicaraguan and U.S. governments led to the release of 135 political prisoners from prison. 13 of the freed prisoners are evangelical Christians who worked with the Texas-based Mountain Gateway Ministry. In 2023, they helped organize a series of evangelistic festival meetings in Nicaragua, attended by more than 1 million people. Students and Catholics were also among those released. Freed prisoner Francisco Arteaga said he was arrested for speaking out about the government's oppressive actions against the Catholic Church. Leaning out of a window on the bus that took him and others to Guatemala, he thanked God for his freedom.
Muy bien, gracias a Dios, estar libre. Viva Nicaragua libre! Viva Nicaragua libre! Viva!
Folks, we rejoice that these Christians and others are now free from prison. But why were they prohibited from returning to their homes and forced out of the country? Daniel Ortega and the Nicaraguan government do this all the time. They force people to make an untenable choice: be expelled from the country or remain in prison. Great choice. Leave your home and the land you love because you threaten the government's power. It's the same choice given to recent Venezuelan presidential election winner Edmundo Gonzalez. He fled the country for asylum in Spain after dictator President Nicolas Maduro's government issued an arrest warrant. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, banned from running in the recent election, said Gonzalez feared for his life. Machado and Gonzalez possessed evidence proving that the opposition had won 67% of the vote, compared to Maduro's 30%. Maduro had a corrupt election commission declare him the winner. Protests have continued off and on since the July election, and Maduro had enough. This week, he announced Gonzalez is on his way to a new life, and peace will now prevail in Venezuela above all else. Folks, peace cannot prevail when leaders steal elections and political opponents are sent to prison or expelled for their opposition. Please pray for the people of Nicaragua and Venezuela. And let's pray the tactics of these two Latin American countries don't become the normal way of operating right here in the United States. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.